Hey everyone, I'm out here at the Strasburg Rail Road where we are going to get an awesome behind the scenes look at what goes into the process of getting a steam locomotive ready for a day of service. Make sure to stay tuned and enjoy. Alright, so this video is of my Hostling tour at the Strasburg Railroad in July this past year, and this tour basically goes over the process that the Strasburg Railroad goes through to get their steam locomotives ready in the morning for a day of service. The tours are offered on Fridays for select months throughout the year, and I was fortunate enough to get a ticket for one of them, and boy was it awesome. I'm saying was because this is actually me talking in past tense as I'm doing this intro in the afternoon and the day that it happened in the morning. Not confusing at all. But anyways guys, before the video begins, I just wanted to say thank you so much for 20,000 subscribers. I truly can't be more proud of this channel and of you guys and just the awesome amount of train stuff that we have developed here. This video is dedicated to you, and as I said before, stay tuned and enjoy.
Half the size. The reason why the railroad wanted to have the engine relatively short is they didn't want to have to replace their turntables and make them longer. However, probably within about 4 years after she was built, they replaced their turntables with longer turntables and got bigger engines. This engine, when she was built, was originally a mainline engine for running up and down the railroad, and she very quickly became replaced on the main line as more of a branch line service engine as the engine became bigger, stronger, and as they got more improvements. She had a rebuilding in around 1926, I believe. She got a brand new cylinder block then, and her valve gear was updated from Stevenson valve gear, which is between the frames, like 89, we'll see that in a little bit, to Baker valve gear, which sits outside the frames. That also freed up space inside the frames, so her air reservoirs, that most of the time are on the outside hanging underneath the running board, are actually between the frames, actually above the driving axis, which makes them a pain to replace, as you have to drop out the driving axis to replace them. Thankfully, you don't have to do that very frequently. We have messed around with her looks over the years. She's had multiple different looks throughout her career in regular service. We've basically duplicated most of them. Headlight has been mounted up high. She has had more of the cowcatcher pilot. But basically all the different looks that she has had here on the railroad, aside from just the original look she had in the 90s with Strasburg painted on her and the lines, the yellow lines for outlining the cab and the tender. All the other looks pretty much have been emulating what she had looked like in the past when she was owned and operated by the Norfolk Western Railroad. Come down this way. 39 was built in 1910 by the Locomotive Works for what we would call dual service use. Short, fast passenger trains, short, fast freight trains. She was not meant to be a strong, heavy puller. She has a relatively small boiler, small firebox. She wasn't meant to do long, heavy pulls. Where 475 over here, you can see the firebox on the end of the boiler is a lot bigger. The drivers are also smaller. So 475 is meant to do slower trains, pull heavier trains, and has a larger firebox for more steaming capacity to be able to do the long, heavy pulls that 89 was not meant to do. Each type of locomotive was built for a specific use. Thomas over here and 31, which is the hulk that's slowly being worked on, those are both switchers, 060s, no lead truck wheels, 6 drivers, no trailing truck wheels. They're meant to pull trains short distances in yards and switch out trains, long, heavy trains in yard setting. Basically, very short pulls, and a lot of times for build up steam, build up water as you're waiting, as the brakeman and conductor doing the job. Also have very limited coal supply, water supply, because they were always near a coal and water source. Number 89 here is a 260, has 2 lead truck wheels in front of the cylinders, 6 drivers, and 0 trailing wheels. The 260s were built as the step up from the original 440 American type locomotive. Slightly bigger engine than the 440s, but again, still not very big in the grand scheme of things. Now over here with 475, we have a 480. 4 lead truck wheels, so we have 2 lead truck wheels in front of the cylinder block, 2 lead truck wheels behind the cylinder block, 8 drivers, no trailing truck wheels. This is pretty much the next step up. The 4-wheel lead truck gives better guiding going around the curves, and then the more drivers, you can actually get a bigger engine without overloading any individual axle. As the engines progress from here, you got engines that had trailing trucks underneath the firebox. We don't have any that are in operation. If you go across the street to the museum, you will find multiple examples of engines that have trailing trucks. The trailing truck was used to carry weight of the larger, heavier firebox. This weight was not needed for adhesion on the drivers. And then from there, engines kept getting bigger and bigger. For 1906, 475 was a relatively large engine. For 1910, when 89 was built, she was already on the small side of things. They pretty much did not build them smaller than this for the most part after 1910. They'll give you a brief history of how the engines were made. Now, the Hostler is going to be going around doing different things. You actually hear them. Don't know if we'll be able to see them. Still up there? Come down here. And depending on where you are, the water can be anywhere between 5 grains up to 20 grains for hardness. So we are down right around 1 grain for hardness. The descaler keeps all the scale that's in the water as a soft scale. A little bit of scale in the boiler is a good thing because it helps protect the surface of the boiler metal if there's dissolved oxygen in the water. Up on this side, you will be lubricating the cup for the power reverse. He's right now climbing up to the steam dome to check, the sand dome. To check see how much sand there is there in the sand dome. But you can see we have 2 smoke jacks up here. We have smoke jacks so the engines can be different places in the engine house and still be able to vent the smoke to the outside atmosphere. You have to be careful when you're climbing up there because you're very easy to hit your head. Not only does that hurt, but also that knocks down a lot of soot and everything onto you and onto the engine. Up here on top, he's opening up valves on the turret. That will let steam flow into the turret and then out of the turret and into the different pipes that come off of the turret. He will have pipes and valves up there for the injectors, one on each side, of water to the boiler, the blower, which creates draft on the fire when you're sitting still, the dynamo, the generator, electricity for the headlights and cab lights. And then he will also have a valve that will open up to start the air compressor. Everything that operates off of steam has a main valve up there. So if the line blows or starts leaking, you can actually shut off the steam supply to that line up there. Whenever we are opening up the valves, we want to open them up slowly. Everything has been closed up there all night long. While the pipes are still reasonably hot, they're quite cold compared to the steam temperature. So when you open up the steam, start the steam flow, you'll get a lot of the steam condensing into water. You don't want to have it hammer. If you open it up quickly, steam will condense, and then that water condensate will be pushed along the tubes very quickly by the steam pressure flowing quickly behind it. And when you come up to bends and turns in the piping, it will create a lot of stress and hammering on the pipes. So we will open it up slowly, and then once you hear the cranking basically stopping as everything's filling up, we will then open up the valve all the way. What he's lubricating right here is our power reverse. As the engine became larger, the forces on the valve gear became so great that the manually powered Johnson bar was not going to work. While you can move the valves in the valve gear when the engine is sitting still, as the engine is moving down the track and the faster you go, the more forces and friction are being applied to the valve gear because of the motion of the engine. These large Johnson bars could throw the engineer back and forth in the cab. So as the engine got larger, we came up with the idea of having compressed air on the locomotive. They came up with this power reverse, which is an air assist reverse. So the air cylinder is down here, the valve is sitting up on top, and he's actually lubricating the cup to lubricate the air cylinder and the air valve. So when the engineer is adjusting the valve gear, he's not physically adjusting the valve gear, he's adjusting the lever up here that moves the valve on top of the power reverse to support air to push on either side of the piston to move the valve gear. So this way, the engineer is not subjected to all the forces of the valve gear when you're running. and it makes his job as engineer a lot easier to adjust the valves and move the valve gear around. What he's using right now to lubricate up there is called air oil. Air oil is a very, very thin type of oil. Most people are familiar with the oil weights based off of the automotive industry. There's a lot of different ways to classify oil for weight. But based off the automotive industry, in a lot of cars we use 5W30, 5W20, 0W10, whatever the oil is. Automotive oil that's used in your car is a lightweight oil. This oil is a lighter weight still. This will probably be around a 0 to a 1 by that classification system. The purpose of the air oil is to lubricate the air cylinders and air valves on the engine only. The oil itself, even though it's a very thin, lightweight oil, is too thick to go through the brake system onto the cars and into the valves there. It is too sticky, even though it's very lightweight. The air brake valves on the cars, we actually lubricate with graphite. Any water condensation or grit or oil is actually too sticky, will cause the valves to not work properly. So the air oil is meant to lubricate the appliance on the engine itself. It will travel through the pipes on the engine, that will then be bled out of the drains on our dirt collectors, oil collectors, and the condensate drains on the air tanks, which are between the frames. We'll go back around to the, here he is.
Here I am.
So what he's lubricating right here, this is the steam oil lubricator. Air oil, one end of the spectrum, steam oil, the other end. The steam oil is a very thick type of oil, it has additives in it, because not only does the oil need to be able to put up with the pressures of the steam, but also the temperature. This locomotive operates at a boiler pressure of 200 psi. The steam temperature is about 386, 390 degrees Fahrenheit. Your standard automotive oils will break down with those temperatures. When most people think of a thick oil, they think of something like a high point gear oil, which is an 80, 90 weight oil. Steam oil, when you go off of the automotive industry standard, is about a 400 weight oil. It's a very thick, tar-like oil. Thankfully, in the summertime, it will pour relatively quickly. What are you going to be doing next?
Pretty much finished up on the engineer side. I'm just going to start working on everything on the fireman side, and then
Okay, cool.
around. So I'm going to do the crank pins next.
Okay.
Well, actually, I'm going to do the air compressor, and then crank pins and all the grease.
All right, cool, cool. So we'll go around to the other side then, since we work on this side. So to give you an idea of the different oils look like, this is air oil. You can see how thin that is. Very, very thin and runny. That's what's going to be lubricating the power reverse, as well as the air compressor cylinders on the air side of the steam pump. For the crank pins, we use oil lubrication. It's going behind you.
Thank you.
Oil lubrication gives us a better lubricant without all the mess of grease. Not to mention, good old hard grease is not really made anymore. You have to be taken up to near its flash point 3 or 4 different times. Places don't like doing that. So we change back over to oil. Oil is basically 99% lubrication, grease maybe 50%. So this is the oil that we use on the crank pins. It's green, it's called green velvet. Takes a bit to pump. But you can see how thick that is. That's what we use to lubricate the crank pins. That's meant to take high forces and high rotational forces that the crank pins see in everyday use. On the journals and axles of the car, let's see. I'll use this one. We use an oil called journal oil or journal guard. Now, both go out kind of fast. Sorry. So you can see how runny that is. This is designed to be able to stay on the axles or on the pins for up to a year, so it has a long hang time. This is what we use to lubricate all of our axles on the tender, on the cars, on the engine. Steam oil. I'm pouring it. So it's probably, what, 75, 80 degrees in here? So this is steam oil. See how thick that is?
Very thick.
This oil takes a very long time to pour in the wintertime. That's how it drops very slowly. in this type of heat. So in the wintertime, it comes off very, very slowly. So these are different types of oils that we will use when lubricating the engine. They each have their own spot. You don't ever want to mix them up because it will damage the engine. The air compressor is a steam-powered pump that pumps air, and then it will be stored in the reservoirs. So on the top side of the pump, we have the steam side that is lubricated with the mechanical lubricator that's right here. There's actually a pneumatic pump in here that will actually cause us to pump around when you have air pressure on the system. The two cups up top are the air oil cups that lubricate the air side of the compressor. Has a pipe that sticks up in the middle that has a vent on the top. As the pump sucks air in, it will suck a little bit of oil out of those cups to lubricate the compressor. For us, with even our long days, the pump will be lubricated once a day. For the crank pins, the main crank pin here, which sees the most amount of force, will typically be lubricated twice a day. Everything else is lubricated once a day. Now, this pump is what they call a cross-compound pump. It uses the steam twice and compresses the air twice. He's lubricating the steam oil lubricator on the pump right now. So when the steam comes out of the boiler, it will go into this air cylinder right here, the small one. It's a high pressure steam from the boiler. It will push the piston either up or down. And then when it exhausts, the exhaust from the high pressure will go into the low pressure cylinder. Because it's exhaust steam and it's lower pressure, the piston is larger in diameter to account for the lower pressure steam. After that pushes this piston, it will then exhaust out the stack. The air will be sucked into the large air piston here. So you get a large volume of air. This is the low pressure air piston. It will be compressed, I think, up to about 35, maybe 40 pounds in this piston. And then in this cylinder, it will be compressed all the way up to the main reservoir pressure, which on this engine has a high pressure around 120 pounds and a low pressure around 106 pounds, I believe. If you take a look at our driving wheels here, you will see there's a crank pin on one end where the rod's attached, and then there's a weight on the other end. What are these counterweights for? You guys know? No, you're on the right track. No pun intended with that one. The weights here are to help counterbalance the forces from the other end of the wheel. He's lubricating the rod on the very last driver. You can see how that has the rod only coming in from one side. So the weight and forces that counterweight on that last driver needs to counterbalance is based off of the weight of the crank pin and half the weight of the rod. Whereas this wheel right here has rods coming in from both sides. The main driver has rods coming from both sides, plus the main rod connecting up to the cross-headed piston, plus eccentric crank and eccentric rod. So the main driver has to counterbalance not only this weight here, but also the masses, the reciprocating masses of the crosshead and then the piston. So because you have that much extra weight in these counterbalance, the weight on the main driver will be a lot bigger than everything else. Most of the time, the weights will be hollow for your other than main drivers. The main driver, the secondary will be typically solid with cast iron or cast steel. The main is typically hollow filled with lead to get the extra weight that's needed. Sometimes you will have hollow counterweights elsewhere. It just depends on the size of the engine, where the counterweight is, size of the casting, etc., etc. What he's lubricating right here are the crank pins. Inside these, can you open up one? I can show them what's inside one.
Yeah.
Got it? I have it right here. So if you guys want to come over here and take a look inside this one, it's a cup, and I don't know if the oil's low enough if you can actually see, there is a pin down inside there. There's a plunger. The plunger sits and seals off the bottom of the oil cavity. As the crank pins go around and the wheels rotate, the crank pin will come up to the top, the crank pin and rod itself will slow down. The plunger will keep going up because of inertia. It will go up until it hits this adjusting screw. And it will let in a little bit of oil down into the bearing. The faster the engine is running, the higher the pin will lift until it's limited by our stop pin here. So the slower you run, the less oil goes into the crank pin. The faster you run, the higher the plunger will go up, so the more oil that it will get into the bearing. So it's self-regulating in that sense. We changed this engine over to oil 2007, 2008, and I think we finished in 2009. I have the wrench piece. So all right, it's tight now. Whenever you put the oil caps back on, you make sure they're tight so they don't come off in service. Looks like the rim of the wheel's broken, right?
Right.
I think that's a boo-boo, or do you think they meant that?
I think they meant that.
There's another one down here. Another one over here. Another one on the bottom of the wheel.
Ooh.
This is called a divided rim. This is old school technology. What happens when you have something that's hot and it cools down? What physically happens to that object?
Expansion and contraction.
Exactly. This is a relatively large casting, and you see how the rim is relatively thin. This is the technology from the 1800s. They understood the concept of expansion and contraction, and what they were afraid of is when you cast a wheel casting, it's a large diameter, relatively thin rim. As the wheel casting cools, they were afraid it would crack. Well, you know what? If you purposely break it, it can't crack. Okay, fine. So the wheels cast, and then they machined out that slot there, so that's smooth size, and put a block in there. Do steam locomotives have tires? I see some nods yes, I see some people not sure. This ring right here is the tire. It's made of hardened steel. It's what rides on the rail. For the most time, the tire is thick enough when new, you can wear it out, turn it once, wear it out again, and then you may have to replace it, or you may be able to turn it and reprofile it for a second time. This is the renewable piece. It's a lot easier to replace the tire than to replace the wheel center, the crank pin, the axle, for each wheel position, which has different sizes. He's doing the molly grease right now. So you see how quickly he did over here? I'm going to keep talking. Watch how slowly he goes on the valve gear because of the number of grease fittings over there on the valve gear.
72. There's
72
72
on this
grease
engine.
fittings.
Yes, there's a lot of them. So the technology was understood to be, you wanted to have what's called a divided rim like this. And then you have a steel tire that is sweated on. You heat up the tire to about 450 degrees, it expands, you slip it over the wheel center, and then it shrinks on. Cast iron is very strong under compression, which is why having a divided rim like this was no problem. Because you're actually compressing this cast iron center. You're compressing the rim onto these blocks that you made. Generally speaking, you didn't have any problem with that. Where did the technology of the steel tire come from? You guys know? It's older than railroads.
Wagon
Horse
wheels.
and buggy, mills, yes.
Wagon
Because
wheels.
wagon wheels, horse and buggy, and mills. They use this because their technology at the time, you make stuff out of wood. Well, wood doesn't last very long, whether it's in a mill, whether it is on the wheel. So they actually would have a band of metal that they would wrap around and then forge weld it together, put it in a fire, get it red hot and hammer it to make it be a solid loop. Heat that up over a fire and then slip it over the wheel or the roller. The shrink on and hold the wheel or the roller in compression and give a surface that is resistant to wear in whatever surface it's going to be in. Same thing here. What's the nickname of a steam engine?
Iron horse.
Iron horse. What are we in? An engine house. What's the nickname for the engine house? Barn. What is, like where the track comes in through that door, what is this section of the engine house called? Same thing with the roundhouse. A stall. Borrowing terms from horse and buggy days. Hostler, where do you think that term came from? Horse and buggy. Hostler was somebody who tended the horses in the barn. So the hostler is tending the iron horse in the barn. A lot of the technology was actually borrowed from that time, and terminology was just adapted from the technology that they knew at that point in time. Here in the United States, are you a driver of a train or are you an engineer? Do you run a train or do you drive a train? Here in the States, not other countries.
Run and engineer.
Exactly. Other countries, you were a driver. United Kingdom, driver. Translations from French, German, Romanian, all translate as driver. Here in the United States, engineer. Do you know one of the biggest reasons why? Think of Europe. Was Europe an older culture than us? Did they have planned cities, major cities at the times of railroads? Yes. So they were more technology advanced than we were right from the start. When we started building trains and railroads over here, our technology was probably about 30, 40 years behind continental Europe. Our stuff broke down on a regular basis. So our drivers then had to become mechanics and engineers to repair them when they were out of the road. Our technology was also such, we built out into the wilderness, they built between major cities. I studied as a exchange student at the University of Stuttgart. Stuttgart itself is, I think, only about 400, 500 years old. However, the Roman settlement that was there first was about 900 years old. Old settlements. They built their railroads from place to place and actually used it as a people mover to go from civilization to civilization. Better track conditions, they had better technology to build the engines, and their engines actually ran, generally speaking, better than ours did. So unfortunately here we had to deal with not having the same technology and then compensate it, because then all of our engineers also were basically mechanics, and they would help repair the engines out along the road. If you were to be on the train back in the days of steam, how far do you think you could go between a full engine servicing, so lubricating, greasing, inspecting, not just taking on water, but the actual physical servicing that you're seeing here? How far do you think you could go down the track before that had to happen?
50 miles?
50 miles in heavy duty territory where you're like going up the mountains where the engines are really being worked hard, up to about 100 and 120 miles on relatively easy terrain.
Okay.
That's where the terminals were located. So at the terminals, you wouldn't have a little dinky little engine house like this. You would have a full roundhouse that could probably hold anywhere between the 10 and 20 engines, complete with your modern day back shop. So the back shop that's down there that you would see if you're on our shop tour at noon, is what they would have in back of the roundhouse. It's called the back shop. You do all sorts of heavy duty repairs there. We here, Aaron, how many guys do you have employed here in the engine house? 4 or 5, something like that?
5, I think now.
Okay, 5 people is what we have employed here in the engine house. In the back shop, we have, I want to say, neighborhood 25 to 30 people, and that's between machinists, welders, and carpenters. So we're looking at 35 to 40 people full-time here for this operation. In a roundhouse, you probably have about 300 to 400 people working at a major roundhouse. So we're looking at like Pennsylvania Railroad, New York Central Railroad, Union Pacific. And that would include people between those who are taking care of the engines for the hostling and the general servicing, plus those in the back shop doing the heavy duty repairs. Steam engines are very, very labor intensive. These things running hard, about 100 miles, 120 miles. You are generally going to be doing multiple different smaller repairs to it, replacing some different cotter pins. Maybe you need to do some adjusting on the driving box, adjusting on the rods. They are very, very labor intensive. Now you got to your more modern steam engines. Think of, and I know there's a video on YouTube from the NW, the modern steam locomotive, where it's showing like the NWJ class locomotive from the 40s running from, I think it's just under 400 miles one way, from one end of the line in Roanoke to the other end of the line in Cincinnati, and back again without any major lubrication. But you still have the crew change, you still have 2 crews, you still have the fuel costs, you still have the water. They're just very labor intensive. So even the modern day steam engines were still very, very labor intensive. That's one of the reasons why the diesels came to be. And what time is it now? You have been here. You've been here for 48 minutes. This thing is not ready to roll. Did anybody hear the diesel start up out here?
Yep.
Yeah.
Where is the diesel?
Gone.
Not here. Yeah, a little bit of a difference, isn't there? So this is kind of what you're seeing back in the days of steam. Railroads employed a huge number of people. Now during World War II and World War I, because railroads were very important, anybody who was working for the railroads, generally speaking, wasn't drafted for the war. However, a lot of men still volunteered to go to the war from the railroads, And I want to say up to 10% of the railroad force was women, because the men were at war. Now, that's just the railroad side of things. Generally speaking, whatever population was employed directly by the railroad, you probably had about 4 times that amount of people employed in jobs related to the railroad and the railroad industry. So this whole ball of wax. So you need to have people to get water supply, people to get your fuel, whether it be oil or coal supply, maintenance facilities and everything like that, all related to the railroad. You also had your track gangs. Oh, you then had all your industries that were served that also needed to have their own sets of guys who move stuff around their industry yards and take care of their industry. So you had a lot of people that relied on the railroad and the railroad industry. You still do. The only catch is these things aren't running, so you've reduced your labor force. All right, I'll check back in with you. I'm back. One of my machines I need to catch back up with. So this is the cab. Where I am standing, this is the plate between the engine and the tender. So there's literally 6 inches of frame left behind the boiler. This is the back header of the rear of the boiler. What's up there is the pressure gauge, about sitting, I think, just slightly less than 70 pounds. Over here on this side, and the same thing on the engineer's side, is the water glass. There's a prism in there, so when the light passes through prism and the seam space, there's silver look at the top. When it passes through the prism and the water space at the bottom, it's dark. Really easy to see the water level that way. And it's up in front of Aaron, but Aaron makes a better door than a window. Love you, buddy. So now that Aaron has his hand on up here, that is the automatic train brake. That's what the engineer uses to slow down the train. Just in front of that is a smaller valve that looks like that. That's the independent brake for the engine and tender. Draping down across the boiler is the throttle handle that the engineer can use. And beside the engineer over here in the cab is a vertical bar, a reverse bar in this engine, to push the valve gear forward and backwards to move forward and backwards. Most of the time the fireman will stand where you guys are on the deck. The coal and the tender is behind you guys. And that is shown here, the firebox. Now that is the bank. The bank is about 45 to 55 scoops of coal, all piled up in the back of the firebox. It's meant to choke itself out and burn slowly overnight. As you can see, everything else in there is completely just dead ash. He will be emptying out the ash, dumping the ash into the ash pan, then breaking open the bank outside, and then spreading the bank around and igniting fresh coal with it. So we will be coming back up here so you can actually watch the progress of the fire. This firebox is relatively small, it's about 45 square feet. Humans could fire up the box about 70 square feet, and that was pretty much the maximum size of the box that we could fire. Once they came up with the automatic stoker, they got a lot bigger engines.
It's the first time I've seen one banked.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times when people are around, they're hot and running,
Yep.
or they're cold in storage. Yeah.
Yep.
We'll climb back down again. Again, please watch your step. cutaway section. Here in the back of the point is the firebox. What he's doing right now is the blade, because the clip at the bottom of the firebox, he's rocking them back and forth to dump the ash shaft. So what he's doing is taking off the old back from yesterday from the fire. He's starting off by taking down the front side of the firebox to clean the grates off. These grates are what called finger grates, so they have fingers like this that overlap, and they rock like this to dump your ash down. After he cleans the front, he'll start cleaning the back. As he's doing this, you may see some of the red hot coals from the bank falling down. We need to make sure that all the ash is cleared out, so we will end up dumping part of the bank as we're doing this, just try to get all the ash cleared out. If you'll notice, there's up the stack, there's a little bit of color there. When he's shaking the fire down, the stack color is going to be a combination of dust and ash that's being knocked loose, as well as the coal when it starts to break open. So the bank is cooked itself overnight. What you see just glowing red, that's just the solids that are still burning. There can still be coal in there, but all the hydrocarbon gases are not going to boil off and burn yet. So as the coal heats up, but it's still relatively fresh, you'll get dark smoke in the hydrocarbons. The ash is going into the ash pan right now, which is basically the hopper that'll store ash pits and then dump the ash out. Generally speaking, with the quality of coal that we generally get, we only have to shake down the ash once a day. Occasionally you'll get really ashy coal where the fire will get really thick and then you shake it down throughout the day. Does black smoke mean that the fireman is bad and doesn't know what they're doing? No. I absolutely hate it when people say black smoke means that the fireman doesn't know what he's doing. There's lots of reasons for black smoke. Number one, with coal, the hydrocarbon gases in the coal will boil off of the coal starting between 600 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. They won't start to burn until around 1600 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. So you have this huge temperature range where you can put fresh coal on the fire, hydrocarbon gases will boil off, create smoke, because it's still not hot enough to be burned. You also have different fuel qualities, whether it is coal or oil. We burn bituminous coal here, which is soft coal, which has a lot more volatiles in it, and it creates, the volatiles are what creates the smoke. Anthracite, hard coal, if it's down longer, if it's compressed more, you don't have the same volatiles, it's more solid matter, and anthracite produces basically no smoke. Those are the two basic types of coal. And then you have multiple different subgrades between those two major types of coal. The easiest way to describe it is you have smokeless coal, steamless coal, smokeless coal, hot coal, you have smoky coal that's steamless, you have smoky coal that's hot, and any variation there between. Same thing with oil. So it's easy, yes. So with oil, you have different subgrades of oil that can be burned as well. And there's also different levels of impurities. So depending on what fuel is, you can have different problems with it based off of the grade of fuel that you're burning. Under the expansion contraction when that happens. Coal, you have a lag period, what's called lake period. The time between putting the fresh coal on and getting the heat out of it. Right now he's raking the bank around. You can see actually some of the bank falling through the grates that's pushing it around. Take a look at your smoke now. That's the remaining coal from the bank starting to ignite, starting to boil off the volatile. From this point on, he has about 5 minutes to get fresh coal in that fire and get it to ignite. As that bank, while it would still burn a long time, as the bank, you spread it out, heat will dissipate very quickly. Diesel's coming back down again, so be aware of that. When the fireman is prepping the fire for a trip, he is purposely putting too much coal in the fire at that point in time. The preparation for pulling the train, having a starter down, and needing more fuel. So you also have darker smoke carrying the fire. You can see each scoop, when the left hand side of the bucket is filled, it's probably in the neighborhood of 800 probably on this engine with the entire tank car thing is probably going to be hundreds of thousands of pounds low per trip. I would give you a shovel in case your shovel, you know, put 1,000 pounds of coal. Is the bigger shovel the better shovel to use? Why?
It's too heavy.
It's too heavy, yes, that is true. There's a catch though to this. And it all depends on how people want to fire. The longer the shovel, the tendency is it will tend to go more straight in than flare out. Think of it more like a rifle versus a handgun. It gives more direction. So it all depends on what you're trying to do. Me, I will use a smaller to medium size shot. So number 2 to number 4 screw. Number 6 screw is about this long, about that wide. For me, I can't stop firing that, but it gives you the trouble. You're always shoveling the way other shovels depending on how your eyesight lines up, as he's making the fire, you can actually see some of the hot coals drop through the grates and into the ash pan. This is our ash pit. When we dump out the ash, we will actually wet the ash down with water, trying to soak it. Twofold reason. Number 1, we don't like breathing in the ash, so the ash stuff, so when you wet it down, you're minimizing the ash stuff that's in the air. Number 2, because you're minimizing what's in the air, you're minimizing what gets over the engine. What gets over the engine not only will make the engine look dirty, it can also get into the rod bearing and the axle bearing. Number 90 had her main crank case replaced in the early 90s. All of the other crankcases, all the other emissions are still original from 1924. Dare guess which crankcases are the most worn? Would it be the front crankcase or would it be the rear crankcase? The rear one.
Rear.
Because of the ash from the fire.
Ah, I was thinking the force.
The grid gets in there. Her rear driving axle has also been replaced. Now, like for 75, ash can break over the rear axle, so that rear axle is always exposed to a lot of dust and ash. Think of it as sandpaper. Yeah, it's not helpful. So when you look at the outside of the firebox, these right here are rivets. This holds the mud ring or the foundation ring of the firebox together. You have your outside sheet of the firebox, you have about a 4-inch wide steel plate, then you have an inside shell of the firebox. You can kind of see here, there's 2 shells. There's 2 shells of the firebox, the outside shell that we're seeing, and then the inside shell where the fire is. There's steam and water pressure between those 2 sheets. They want to blow apart under pressure. We have rigid stay-bolts and flexible stay-bolts. Back in the early days, they only had rigid, so this is a rigid stay-bolt. It's a threaded type of bolt originally that would be threaded into both sheets. They're drilled hollow, so that when the bolt cracks and breaks, the water will squirt out and let you know the bolt's broken. The ends are hammered over. These bolts are straight thread bolts, they're not a taper thread. You thread the bolt in, and then you rivet the end over, hammer it over so the thread bolt expands in the sheet, and that's what causes it to seal. And it'll keep your inside and outside sheet from trying to blow apart. In your early locomotives, think of 1800s where they have what we call a keyhole shaped firebox. The firebox is between the drivers and the air is opened up like the old keyholes in the old doors. This is both straight. As you got into the larger boxes, like the 435, the more rectangular boxes, there are finding areas where these rigid bolts would break. Outside sheet is exposed to air temperature and the temperature of the water in the boiler at 200 psi, that is 380 degrees or so. And the inside sheet is exposed to the fire temperature, 1000 degrees, and the water temperature. So you have across the sheet a large range of temperature variation, which means that they're going to expand and contract differently. With the rigid bolts, as the sheets move like this, you start having the bolt bend into an S shape. The bolts aren't happy with that. These bolts would break. They came up with a flexible bolt. Flexible bolt threaded into the inside sheet and hammered over, rigidly connected there. On the outside, you have these sleeves with a ball and socket joint, so it can move around and flex and still bear the load. Where does the ball and socket joint sound familiar? Our shoulders, our hips. We didn't invent this technology, it was borrowed from someplace else. Right now he's dumping out the axe. You still get some dust spots, but not everything will be perfectly wet. We want to make sure that the ash pan is completely clean. So that way, we don't have the ash pile up against the grate. So if we have ash piling up against the grate, that will restrict the airflow. What do you think will happen if we restrict airflow to the fire? Smother it. We'll smother it. What else do you think happens?
Can't get as much steam.
Okay. Think about the grate. What do you think the air coming up through the grate is helping the grate in any way? You're correct. Cool them.
You don't want to
You
melt
have
the
a
grate.
hot fire on top of the grates. The only thing keeping those grates from melting is you have all this cool air coming up through them to keep them cool. So if you let your ash pile up against the grates and restrict the airflow, not only will you have your fire to go dead, you will also be burning your grates since the grates will start overheating. He's breaking the fire right now, so he's pushing the burning coal around. While he's doing that, this contraption right here is called an injector. You take steam from the boiler, comes from the top, take water from the tenor coming in over here, magic happens. Then it's forced through the lead pipe into the boiler. Okay, so 200 pounds of steam from the boiler can overcome 200 pounds of steam from the boiler. What do you think the magic is that's happening inside that injector body?
Pressure is taking water out of
If I have a fire hose
it. Preheat it.
and I stand over here, I want to squirt at you guys. What do I do to the end of the fire hose? Pinch it down. Venturi effect. You pinch it down, narrow it down, you will gain velocity, gain speed, it will actually lose pressure. When the steam exits the boiler, it will can have the properties of a given pressure, it can travel up to a given speed. I want to say 100 psi, I can travel up to about 80 miles an hour. That's the property of the steam as it enters the injector. When it comes in the injector, it goes through a nozzle, it tapers down, flares out at the end. As it tapers down, it gains speed, loses pressure. So as it exits that nozzle, it's traveling in a straight line at atmospheric pressure or below a lot higher rate of speed. At the end of that nozzle is where the water is introduced. As the steam exits that nozzle, because you have a fast column of steam, it creates a partial vacuum to draw water into the injector. The water will condense the steam. Well, steam condensing creates more vacuum, but it'll draw more water into the injector. The steam will pass along some of its heat to the water, as well as the velocity to the water. So it will mix, and as you get down towards the bottom part of the injector, it goes through what's called the delivery nozzle. It opens back up again to slow down the fast-moving water inside the injector body to the slower-moving feed going into the boiler through the delivery pipe. Steam, not very dense, is it? Water, pretty dense. So it is actually the pressure head is caused by the momentum of the water traveling through the delivery pipe to overcome the pressure of the water inside the boiler. A couple small moving parts inside there, that's it. Care to guess when that was invented originally? 1850s.
Oh wow.
The original machine technology was not good enough to have them work well when you're bouncing down the track, but the ability to put water into the boiler when you're standing still, the railroads loved that. Up until that point in time, they had a pump attached to the crosshead, so when you're moving, you can pump water into the boiler. When you're standing around the station, you couldn't. All right, we'll take first round of victims back up to the cab. We'll take a look at the fire. This will just be pretty much a real quick up and down.
I'm a potter. I'm not a trained person. That's so cool.
So that's the fire. It's kind of hot, so I won't keep the door open too long.
Yeah.
But you see how you can see the coal bed throughout most of the fire. This is actually a relatively cold fire right now. When you're coming up the hill, all you actually see in there are the flames.
Wow.
You don't actually see the fire bed, and it's bright, long yellow flames.
Huh.
So yeah, so we'll drop down this side, and then let Aaron move back when he needs to. We've given a little bit of pressure, up to about 80 pounds right now. It's not too bad. So if you look at this drawing, granted the valve here is different than 475, but the cylinder block is the same. So in the bottom section we have the piston, which the piston is right here, and in the top we have the spool valve. It's also called a piston valve. It's a round valve. Called a piston valve because it's the same shape as a piston. Called a spool valve because it's the same shape as like a spool of thread or yarn, where it's big on each end, neck down in the center. The piston in the bottom will have 2 piston rings on it to seal it in. Some of the more modern engines have 3. The spool valve has 2 piston rings on each end to seal it. So the steam from the boiler comes down from the pipe here in the center into the center of the valve. In this diagram, if the valve moves forward, it uncovers that front steam port. So the steam from the boiler will come to the center of the valve chamber, into the front valve port, and push on the front of the piston, push the piston back. At the same time, when the valve has moved forward, the valve has uncovered the rear port of the piston chamber and has opened it up to the exhaust. So while the steam's pushing on the front, it will be exhausting out the back, and the chuffing that you hear coming out the stack is the steam being exhausted from the cylinder. It's the steam that's already expanded, done its work in the cylinder. With Waltrip valve gear, you have a link that rocks back and forth like this with a center pivot pin. When you're in one section of the link, that will be for forward. When you go to the other section on the opposite side of the pivot, the valve moves in the opposite direction to the opposite direction. Waltrip valve gear is pretty much just a series of levers. It makes more sense when you see the link going back and forth and what it's doing. Baker valve gear is a complete series of levers with no one single pivot point. If you really want to see how it works, go across the street to the Rail Museum. They have a model of it. Have fun watching. Yeah. Remember, life takes some bearing. It's slow to catch on. Rehumans don't like new inventions. So, if it's been up in hundreds of years slow to catch on, when do you think it's not the invention? How early? It caught on here in 1900, and we were slow to catch on to it.
Going back to
1840.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeez.
Wow.
Edgar Walters invented this valve gear in Belgium around 1844, 1845. Has anybody heard of Hoinger valve gear? Hoinger. Wilhelm Hoinger invented the same type of valve gear in Germany basically around the same time frame. It was very popular over in Europe and went by the name Hoinger as well as Walters, depending on where you were, because 2 inventors basically invented the same type of valve gear. Stevenson valve gear. There's no earlier type of valve gear, but when do you think it was actually invented? 1841. So Waltrip valve gear is only a handful of years younger, but didn't catch on to this country until 6 decades later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the reason, one of the biggest reasons why it caught on here is the bigger the engines got, the bigger the valve gear needed to become. You ran out of room inside the frame. Oh, the bigger the engines got, the more powerful it became, the more sturdy your frame needed to be. And you can't put frame braces connecting both side frames in when you have a valve gear inside your frame. So really for us, it was not until we started getting the larger engines where the outside valve gears really caught on. Just the way it went. But what about the brakes? This is where technology in the United States, oh wait, here's the first one. This is where technology in the States diverged from technology over in Europe. So around the time of our Civil War, so 1860s, Lincoln pin, you had to get in between the cars, hold that link up, drop the pin in, get your hands out before you got crushed. You can tell Boltman how crazy we were by the number of fingers on that. All digits, not experience at all. Missing 1 or 2, that's some experience. Missing 2 or 3, yeah, probably decent experience. Missing, and the train pipeline at that point in time would have been kept at 70 psi. We had it at 90. When it's done, you assign the brake point valve. Well, the triple valve, it lets air into the air cylinder, into the air reservoir on the car, and releases the air pressure from the brake cylinder on the car. When you do a reduction and reduce the pipeline pressure, there's a shuttle valve and a triple valve. It moves. So it cuts off communication from your pipeline to your reservoir, and then connects your reservoir to your air cylinder to apply the brakes. So it pumps air into your brake cylinder to apply the brakes. The larger the reduction you do, the more braking power you have. The brakes on today's trains operate the same way. Biggest difference is there are multiple redundancies that have been added into the brake system to overcome the shortcomings of the original brake system, but the principle is still the same. Over in Europe, they had straight air brakes. Alright, we'll come on down. They had vacuum brakes, they had hand brakes, and they had cars that had no brakes. They did not have a nationalized system until well after World War I. So prior to World War I, they were actually going to get involved and have a nationalized system where these cars, which are owned privately, would have different styles of brakes. And they all come down to a nationalized system so you could have brakes on your car system. World War I happened, everything had to be pressed into service, so that didn't happen. So after World War I, you had a whole bunch of cars that had vacuum brakes, air brakes, or no brakes that could not work together. So this is primarily your freight cars. So the stories of the freight cars running away is based off of what actually was happening over in Great Britain. Here in the United States, what an engine could pull was based off of how much the engine could physically pull, based off of extractive effort. How much trains could be pulled in the United Kingdom was based off of how much they could stop. We can do about, there'll be 2 groups, basically 5 or so. For the first group, do you want to come back up here, or do you want to go up to the crossings up now?
We'll just come back here. Just make it easier.
Are you coming right on this section? Am I going to realign quick yet?
Oh, I will.
Okay, that works. Okay. So you're setting the fire? Your fire set? You're good? Okay. Alright, first 5 victims are starting to climb up. I'll stay here with those of you who aren't going this time. He will come back and stop right here, and then you guys will trade. So you can get about 5 people up there. And Aaron, if you could also show them what the fire looks like now so you can see the progress of it.
That's going pretty good.
Yeah.
Here's our fire now. It's maybe about half of what it is its absolute hottest.
A very different kind of cab.
Yep. Alright. Oops. Pardon me.
This will be engine number 4 for me.
This is a fun one because we'll go fast up the hill. Hold on.
Alright guys, so we're going to go up the hill now. So I'd like to ask you guys to please just hang on to something, except anything up here.
Yeah.
Pretty much past here is hot. So other than that, enjoy yourself.
Okay. So grab things that look like handrails.
Yeah.
That are behind these supports. Gotcha.
see that gauge up
If I
there.
can just squeeze past you real quick, please. I'm actually gonna go down the steps. You can go a little further.
Going this way.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I hate to be your wet.
Alright guys, so we can head out down that way there. Make sure face the inside of the engine, climb down just like climbing down a ladder.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome,
That was
guys.
awesome.
Glad you guys enjoyed yourselves. Thanks for coming out today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it was. Now
Just
it's repainted.
repainted, yeah.
That's why now you guys change the engine.
Yeah, we repainted it over the winter.
Yep. Where are you guys from? South Jersey. Okay, that's not too far away. Where are you guys from? South Jersey. Okay, that's not bad.
It's the fastest I've ever gone in a cab. At least on a steamer.
It's fun.
Yes.
Get used to it.
Guys,
I've gone
drive
past
me
for
up
a
that cab?
diesel, but
That's why I wanted to do that one, because I knew he was gonna. The reason they do that is to all the soot and stuff that sits in the tubes overnight,
that makes
when
sense.
it get it out,
Oh, yeah,
clear it
it's
out. And that's exactly why he.
okay.
Oil.
Yeah, operation includes an hour of service, for your annual inspection, titer tests, all
If
that.
you start putting all of that
Yeah,
together,
that's probably pretty
for every hour of
Yeah,
operation,
because
you end up with an hour of
particularly when you
service.
start pulling out the tubes and doing all the boiler overhaul, then running, I mean, it's a lot of hours. It just happens, but those major all those hours get dumped into it at one time.
It's the theory that like every year you will spend
Yeah,
about 10% of your house value on your
Exactly.
house.
Yeah.
That might actually be spread over the 20 years that you're there.
Correct. I'll go in here and get these guys, huh?